Hello everyone, and welcome to a presentation of my research and how Goethe's way of seeing has influenced my own work in relation to the heart, particularly as an organ of imaginal perception, and the process that I developed as part of my research called heart sense, and how the two interlink, and how Goethe's way of seeing was actually the foundations of the work that I do currently. So a little bit about me. I have a PhD in transformative learning from the Faculty of Education at Canterbury Christ Church University. I completed the Masters in Holistic Science at Schumacher in 2014. So I was studying between 2013 and 2014. And following the completion of my PhD, I actually founded the Heart Sense Research Institute. And I'm also co-founder for the Centre for Myth, Cosmology and the Sacred. So my interests and influences are intuitive, imaginal consciousness, particularly generated or sparked my interest in this area because of the Masters in Holistic Science that I studied for. What I'm particularly also interested in is the thought of the heart, particularly from the point of view of religious philosopher Henri Corbin and his influence on depth psychologist James Hillman, in the sense that the heart is an organ of imaginal perception. And so therefore the thought of the heart is the imagination, that the imagination is resides or originates in the heart. So my influences continuing are transformative learning, depth psychology, holistic science, cultural history, esoteric wisdom, religious philosophy, sustainability, conflict resolution, and eco-consciousness. So just to put a little bit of context really around my research and my sort of where I started from at Schumacher in 2013 and my ongoing work. So I arrived at Schumacher with an inner sense that there was something wrong with my worldview. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the world just felt so narrow. And even though there was a deeper intuitive sense that I now recognize that was sort of willing me to recognize it, it was as though the framework that I had saw no validity in this pull towards something deeper. There was a sense that, no, that's not real. I can't move into those other deeper, more expansive spaces because that's not correct. But I also, as I moved into the exploration of holistic science through all the wonderful modules, I discovered writers and scholars who had been speaking about how I was feeling through their own particular frameworks and narratives. So Carl Jung is a particular interest of mine. Ian McGilchrist, obviously the neuroscientist and humanities scholar, and his book, The Master and His Emissary, and the American scholar Morris Berman, who basically said many years ago that there is something wrong with our worldview and how the contemporary, when I say our, I mean the contemporary Western accepted worldview that we tend to operate through. So what I was introduced to on the Holistic Science Masters was Goethe's methodology, Goethe's approach. And what this did for me was it demonstrated the multiple ways of knowing that were available to human beings that were equally as valid as the other. So we have the rational, the intellectual, which one might sort of use the kind of metaphor that arises through the rational intellectual arises through the mind or the brain, and the imaginal or intuitive ways of knowing, which I see through my own research as arising through the heart. So it's sort of rooted in the body. So in my own work and my own research, I see these two different ways of knowing that are not polarized. They are equally as valid and supportive of each other. So I'm not setting up a dichotomy here, but what I'm saying is that they have equal validity. And in my own research, I explored this sort of metaphor of a division between sort of head-based in contrast to heart-based knowing, and explored where maybe this kind of metaphor or orientation towards the world that sort of splits us between our heads and our hearts, our minds and our bodies. But really, they are both as equally valid as the other. In McGilchrist's approach, he explores this kind of split, these different ways of knowing through left brain and right brain hemisphere takes on the world. So again, I'm using these left brain, right brain, head, heart, mind, body terms as a helpful metaphor for ways of knowing, which bring us into exploring these ideas. But Goethe's methodology, Goethe's approach, I found helped me to give validity to the lived experience that I was having that encompasses emotion, sensuality, intuition, imagination, meaning, and non-rational experience. And it was like a revelation for me. And I think it was within the first module of the holistic science course where we had Craig Holdridge come to talk to us about Goethe and practicing the Goethean approach. And I found it extremely difficult. I found this approach and this way of seeing very, very difficult. And it was after about 5 days, and everyone else in my cohort was sort of really having the most amazing experiences. And there was nothing happening for me. I felt completely bereft. There was utter silence, because I didn't know how to move into a different way of seeing in the world, a sort of imaginal way, and realised just how bereft I was of another way of seeing. And one of the other helpers, one of the student helpers for our cohort, actually saw my distress and said to me, Louise, you know, what would it be like if you sat with this feeling of feeling bereft, this silence? What would happen? And so I went back out and sat with this beautiful plant groundsel in the courtyard of the old postern. And I gave in. And I felt myself communing with my whole self with groundsel. And in this transformative moment, I felt myself expand into groundsel's world. It was like a moment of deep connection. I experienced a warm, vivid golden light emanate from the center of my being, and understood that this was a direct expression of groundsel's relationship with all the elements that surrounded her, the sun, the earth, the water, and the air. She was in the perfect place, communing with the environment within which she sat. And in my silence, groundsel found the opportunity to speak to me. Her wholeness was expressing itself through me. And I began to see and feel and be in the world with fresh eyes, fresh ears, fresh senses. And this was through Goethe's approach. I felt that I was participating with my whole self, that I was looking and seeing and experiencing differently, that I was in an intimate conversation with groundsel. And not only was I seeing groundsel, groundsel was seeing me. So there was a real understanding between us in that revelatory moment that I had. And as I say, I felt this warm, vivid golden light emanate from the center of my being, and I felt it was my heart, that my heart was being touched by this experience that I'd had with my revelation with groundsel. So this is how deeply Goethe's approach actually affected me. So this idea of the voice of the hidden, the unexpressed other started to make itself increasingly known to me and led me on a deep metaphysical, philosophical exploration, because I was thinking, gosh, if groundsel is, in our ordinary day-to-day way of seeing and being in the world is hidden and unexpressed, then what other unheard others are unable to express themselves authentically? And I started to think about how I could extend Goethe's method into any other whose voice or their authentic selves are not being heard. And I started to think about minority narratives at a social political level, beings of the earth, the more than human world, the earth herself. What happens to these hidden and unexpressed others? And I explored deeply in my own PhD research at the psychological level of the shadow through my own experiences. And at the sociological level, exploring the idea of the phenomenon of conflict, societal breakdown and war. So I was led into a deep exploration of the phenomenon of conflict as a kind of archetypal force, this unheard other that was expressing itself in my life through so many different ways. And I thought, how am I going to explore this? What place in my own body do I feel most connected with? And I've had cardiac issues in the past as well. I have a long history of cardiac issues. And so when I discovered this idea that the heart is an organ of imaginal perception through the religious philosopher Henri Corbin's work, through his own exploration of Sufi mysticism and the work of the 12th century mystic Ibn Arabi and Sufi mysticism, I started to think, my goodness, maybe my heart could lead me into this understanding through a sort of more imaginal inquiry. So the heart in this sense, and through, again, James Hillman, as a depth psychologist, being deeply influenced by Henri Corbin, coming to understand the heart as an organ of imaginal perception. What would it be like if I was actually understanding my connection with groundsel through my organ of the imagination, through the heart, that my heart in my own life as an organ of my organ of imaginal perception was trying to talk to me throughout my entire life. So in my research, my heart was seen as the other that I was ignoring. And my narrow view of life before I got to Schumacher, I saw as my head or my kind of rational mind or brain was a dominant force in my life, suppressing the wisdom and guidance of my heart. So the heart was the other in my research. But as the organ of imaginal perception, I had to move into that other and start to understand the voice of my heart and how my heart oriented itself in my life as an organ of perception in relationship with the world. So there's a lot going on there. The title of my PhD was How Can the Thought of the Heart Offer Effective Ways of Engaging with Conflict? And Henri Corbin, James Hillman were deep influences on my work, taking the heart as the organ of imaginal perception. And I grew a conversation between my heart and the world, and between my heart and my brain. So my heart was coming in to be seen as equally as valid, the imagination, this organ of imaginal perception, equally as valid as the mind and the rational intellect. So through the guidance of my heart, as I say there, in relationship with my rational mind, I came to truly know that I'm always in co-creative partnership, reciprocal relationship with a living, breathing world, entwined in a sensual dance of forever becoming through each other. And each other in this relationship can become more authentically themselves through the gesture of openness, love, and kindness, which are the characteristics of the heart themselves towards any other, regardless of what that other is. So obviously Goethe was exploring in his own way, through his own way of doing science, the natural world. But what I thought was we can extend that into our relationships with any other. And this has deep implications for how we relate to ourselves, each other, and the wider world. And because of the characteristics and the qualities that the heart carries, kindness, love, compassion, openness, that the heart lends itself so beautifully to this openness towards any other. And because it's the organ of the imaginal perception, because The world speaks to us through images, through symbols. That's the only way it can speak to us. But the heart understands this. And so in the heart's way, it can pass that information to the rational discursive intellect. And so we can have a deeper, more expansive conversation. Without the heart, I felt through my own personal experience, it's more difficult to do. So finally, I developed a process called heart sense, which I term insightful perception and considered discernment regarding daily life, developed through the wisdom of and benevolent qualities associated with the heart. And by knowing this process is open and living, so we're always in living inquiry, we're opening our hearts out towards another, and the other is becoming always in this process of forever becoming. We offer an invitation for everything that we're in relationship to be itself, its authentic whole self differently in every single living moment. And through this approach, we allow the world, everything that we're in relationship with, ourselves, each other, the natural world, to grow and develop as it wishes in a living moment, present moment by present moment. And as I say at the end of my thesis, the thought of the heart invites us to kindly and courageously break free from the rational ties that bind us, risk ourselves, imagine bravely, and step openly into the dance of life. We have nothing to lose and everything to gain. So my work, utterly inspired by Goethe and my communication and connection with Groundsel, is focused on real life issues. And its applicability is across all realms of discourse, from sustainability, ecological consciousness, conflict resolution. So I currently work with groups and in one-to-one settings. I'm consulting on numerous different projects, eco-consciousness, sustainability and social justice. And I also continue to research, and I'm offering training currently too, through heart sense research and through myth, cosmology and sacred. So do keep in touch. And it's been amazing to be here with you and to show how Goethe has deeply, deeply influenced my research and my ongoing work. So thank you. And here are the references that I used if you're interested.